Hello, fellow cyborgs, and welcome to my October reading wrap-up and also my Victober reading wrap-up because all but two of the things I read this month were Victorian literature novels and short stories. So let's get right into it. I want to start with the non-Victorian picks first. So overall, this was kind of a meh sort of month. I had a lot of 3-star reads, some less, some more. I didn't read a lot, but most of my reads were 3 stars, including this first one, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. As you may know, I love Ray Bradbury. I one day want to read everything that he's ever written. But the last couple reads I've done from him this year have been Dandelion Wine and now Something Wicked This Way Comes. These are 2 of his Greentown books, which technically take place in Greentown, Illinois, I think is how they link together, and they're also full-length novels. This one is definitely more of a novel than Dandelion Wine, which was a collection of vignettes that all took place in Greentown and kind of bled into one another, but it wasn't a true novel. And I've come to the conclusion that Ray Bradbury's novels are probably not my favorite, that I prefer his short stories, which is good for me because he's written a lot of them. As far as Something Wicked This Way Comes, I loved the writing style and I recognized that I loved the writing style, but that didn't necessarily make it an easy read. I ended up halfway through switching to listening to the audiobook for this, which is what helped me finish reading this in the end. I think it was a lot more horror than I was expecting it to be, which sounds stupid, but anyway, I didn't expect it to be quite as creepy as it was. And I also didn't really particularly connect with Jim or Will or Will's father, who are the 3 principal protagonists. This is getting into a different conversation, but evil carnivals and evil freaks, and vilifying people with deformities, that's another conversation, but it's definitely something that didn't make me feel great when I was reading this. Like I prefaced this, I gave this 3 stars because it's Ray Bradbury, and I did enjoy it. I feel like there were some profound moments in here, but I didn't get as much out of it as I was hoping, nor was my attention able to focus on this as much as I think Bradbury deserves my attention to focus on. Hopefully in the future I will reread this with more intent and motivation, but for now I'm glad to have checked this off the list, and I look forward to more of Bradbury's short stories. From Here to Eternity was the other non-Victorian book that I read this month. This is by Caitlin Doughty, who is one of the most awesome people ever. I love her YouTube channel, Ask a Mortician, and I love her whole concept of how the death industry and death consciousness needs to be reinvigorated in America. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is her first work, which is a memoir, and that is one of my favorite books of all time. Now, all of those wonderful things I just said, you're probably thinking, it sounds like you had high expectations for this book, didn't you, Amanda? And you would be absolutely correct. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it more on a 2-star level, but because it's Caitlin Doughty, I gave it 3 stars. I feel like perhaps my expectations were just way too high for this, even though I didn't have any expectations specific to what I would find in here. From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death is in essence a great primer for someone who is interested in hearing about the different death cultures, death traditions, burial traditions around the world. However, I don't think that anyone who's a death geek like myself, who has watched all of Caitlin's videos, will get a lot out of this. I also found that Caitlin's voice was missing in here, where she's very present and very personable in Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. She took a back seat in this one. I feel like she was trying to be far more objective and far more informational rather than memoir, which is totally fine. This is a different genre of nonfiction. However, there were some kind of memoir aspects to this, but this surrounded on the people she was traveling with, and I just wanted to hear more of Caitlin's opinions about the different death traditions that she was showcasing for us. I read this with Hillary from Your Robot Friend, and we both agreed that each chapter, which centers on a different area in the world and then different death rituals, didn't go in depth enough for us, which hence this is a good primer for someone who doesn't know very much about death cultures around the world. So there were a lot of things that really disappointed me, but I will still always support Caitlin Doughty, and I think for you who are interested in knowing how other cultures do the death industry, that this would be a wonderful place to start. It's not academic at all. It's so incredibly readable. It's funny and sarcastic at times. There's also some wonderful illustrations. This is a really fast and accessible read. However, I guess I just didn't want a fast and accessible read, and I think I'll just have to look elsewhere so far in my death knowledge gaining adventure. Now let's get into the Victorian reads. The first one I picked up this month was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This was a glorious buddy read with Acacia Ives. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars as well. There's a trend. So this is the story about Gilbert and Helen. And Helen moves into the town where Gilbert lives, and she's kind of reclusive. She doesn't really want to invite people to ask, where she's from and her circumstances, and she's very mysterious to the point of creating gossip in the town. Gilbert has a thing for Helen, and eventually, to appease him and his curiosity, Helen hands him her diary, which explains how she came to live in the same part of England as Gilbert. I really enjoyed Anne Bronte's writing style a lot. I really enjoyed that, but this is not a happy book at all, and I found that Gilbert, who's supposed to kind of be the hero of the story, if anyone's going to be the hero, I mean, Helen's the heroine, but 2/3 of this is from Gilbert's point of view. If he's supposed to be the hero, I was not on board for heroics from him. I found that he was a bit of a piece of work, and consequently, I was kind of unsatisfied by the ending of this. I was also really, really, really disappointed in the second third of this, which is from Helen's perspective. It's Helen's diary. I love the epistolary form in books. I love reading letters and diary entries mixed in with a otherwise standard narrative, and Helen's diary entries did not read as diary entries at all. It was just the same writing style as Anne Bronte had shown in Gilbert's more traditionally styled sections, and I was so disappointed because I really wanted to read a true diary entry. Every scene was written just like Anne Bronte would write a scene between two characters in Gilbert's perspective. Helen didn't talk about her feelings, she just relayed events, and I didn't really understand Helen's motivations. She seems such like a rational, reasonable person, and how she ended up making a decision that changed the course of her life for the worse. I was never convinced in her belief in this decision. I always thought that it didn't make sense for her. I'm very handsy today. However, I recognize on like an academic and historical perspective that this is a very, very valuable text. I have never seen a Victorian writer write about the pitfalls of marriage so realistically and so just cut and dry. These are sensitive topics that never really get brought up in Victorian literature, or if it is, it's glossed over and metaphored over to the point where you don't even really know what's going on. But Anne Bronte absolutely depicts things and holds no bars, and I really respected that. I also really loved some of the speeches that Helen makes regarding the differences between genders and what we expect of boys versus what we expect of girls. I loved those feminist themes, but at the end of the day, I didn't love the experience of being within this world, and I didn't love the characters. So this is only a 3-star for me, but I think I will read Agnes Grey at some point in the hopes of enjoying that storyline a little bit more. Next, Acacia and I picked up Daniel Deronda by George Eliot, and we both realized that this was not a good choice for right now. George Eliot is a very dense writer, very detailed, and the sort of pacing that was happening within this book was just not gelling with what we wanted. The book is called Daniel Deronda. Yeah. You guys know that. The first part is about a character named Gwendolyn, and that's fine. Suspense, figuring out who Daniel Deronda is. It starts out in like the present day, of this timeline of this work. And then for 100 pages takes us back in time. I don't know if it was like 5 years, 2 years, I couldn't tell you. And just having us set up with an expectation and then dropping that off for chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters, I was not feeling it. Whatever expectations I had for this, I don't know what they were. This isn't that. So now that I know what to expect with Daniel Deronda, now that I know that this is going to be a War and Peace sort of book where I'm going to have to just commit and it's going to be a lot of work, but there's hopefully going to be payoff in the end, hopefully more payoff than War and Peace for me. That's the sort of approach I need to come back to Daniel Deronda with. So Acacia and I are going to save this for the new year, hopefully in January, and it's going to be like the main read, and we're not going to be reading other classics with it, and I think that will work out much better. I then randomly found I had some extra time before another Victorian buddy read was going to pop up, and after I finished the Tenant of Wildfell haul, I rewatched Katie's video, Katie from Books and Things. I will link that video down below, where she compares Jane Eyre and the Tenant of Wildfell haul. And watching that video and listening to her discuss the parallels between these stories really made me want to pick up Jane Eyre again, which I haven't read since 2013 at the latest. So I did. I then reread Jane Eyre. This is the third full reread that the third full read, though I did abort a reread in 2013, and I gave this 5 stars. I loved it more in different ways than I remember loving it before, and as much as I thought I would age out of Jane Eyre, I don't think I will. I think I'll just appreciate different aspects of it as I move on. This time reading Jane Eyre, I really focused on the writing style and just really appreciating how Charlotte Bronte told the story and even her sentence structure. I just really loved her writing style in this. I definitely know that Jane Eyre has its problems. It is 100% not a perfect book. It is 100% problematic on very different levels, but I still love this. And I think part of the reason why I love this is because Jane is such a vibrant character, and I think that Jane is also a fairly similar personality to me. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like reading books about people who are like me because I am self-centered and my world does revolve around me because, I only live in my own body. So it's just naturally going to be that way. This go around too, I also developed a repulsion for St. John because that guy's messed up way more than I thought he was or remembered him being. So this was the only really high rated thing this month, and I'm really glad that I took the time to reread Jane Eyre, and I'm really glad that this is still one of my favorite books, and I think this will be my favorite classic for a long time until I have reread other classics more and know them as intimately as I know Jane Eyre. Then the buddy read happened, which was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy with Miss Sarai from Sarai Talks Books. She and I are on a classics buddy read roll, and it is glorious. And I just absolutely get so much more talking about books with her. It is so incredibly enjoyable. Far from the Madding Crowd received 3 out of 5 stars from me because I didn't like Thomas Hardy's writing style all that much. And as much as I appreciated that his characters were fully formed people with a heck of a ton of flaws, but also some, traits that are meritable, I really didn't root for anybody, and I didn't understand a lot of people's motivations, i.e. Bathsheba, mostly. So I don't think that this would have even received 3 stars from me if I hadn't been discussing it with Sarai and forcing myself to really pick apart these characters' actions and motivations and personalities and all sorts of things like that. I'm interested in trying more Thomas Hardy in the future. What? I don't really know. I'm thinking Desperate Remedies. By the way, let's talk about what this is about a little bit. So, this centers around Bathsheba Everdeen coming in to inherit a farm in rural England in the Victorian era, and she decides to manage this farm herself, which is very feminist and unusual at the time. There are 3 men in her life, and how they interact with her life kind of, for the most part, makes her a little bit miserable. And it's just a story. It's about her. It's about Bathsheba. It's about the dudes in her life. But it's also very much about the rural community too. And it's about kind of idolizing the rural life a little bit. I just couldn't get on board with Bathsheba. You know, like at a certain point, I didn't even find her interesting anymore because she was making the same mistakes over and over again. And it was very infuriating to read. I know she's only like 22, but I just lost patience. I very much did. And as far as his writing style, he likes to use vocabulary that I don't understand. Yes, that's my bad. I should have a larger vocabulary. However, I just don't need to for other authors, you know? So anyway, I'll try Thomas Hardy again in the future, but I'm definitely not on the Hardy love train. And if you have any recommendations about where to go from Far From the Madding Crowd, I've already read Tess, then let me know. I'd love to hear it. Then another kind of buddy read happened with Helene from Books by Lanes. We read 2 pieces of nonfiction by Monsieur Oscar Wilde. I don't know why he's French now. Them being The Soul of Man Under Socialism and The Decay of Lying, the second one being a discourse rather than an essay. I didn't enjoy these. I have this collection of Oscar Wilde not because I am a fan of Oscar Wilde, but because 16-year-old me thought that it would be cool to have a really old book and she had heard about Oscar Wilde. I mean, I like some things from him, but I'm not a super fan. I would probably not have read these had Helene not asked to buddy read them with me. I really didn't get much out of them, to be perfectly honest. As you guys know, I am a melancholy soul, and I don't particularly like comedy or cheerfulness, and Oscar Wilde, while not, I mean, he's comedic. Like, he is really, really witty, but unfortunately it just misses the mark with me emotionally most of the time. I liked some of his ideas in The Soul of a Man Under Socialism, and I agreed with some of them, but, you know, I wasn't super entertained. And in The Decay of Lying, I wasn't here for it. I mean, I read the words, but did they make any indent? No. Was it a waste of time? Yeah, probably. But, you know, I'm not a perfect reader. There was one line in The Decay of Lying, though, where it said, let me find it. I found it. If one cannot enjoy reading a book over and over again, there is no use reading it at all. I completely agreed with that, so much so that I actually pondered not finishing that discourse, because I was never going to read it again. So thank you for that lovely quote, Oscar Wilde, and I respect you as a human and as an author, but I don't think I will ever love you, but I will finish reading this sometime. I pretty much just have his poetry and his fairy tales left, which I'm excited for. I have some other essays too, but yeah, we'll see. Then the final Victorian pick was In a Glass Darkly by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. I don't know why this copy doesn't have that J there. This is a collection of horror/supernatural tales from an Irish author. This was also my underrated pick. I'm not going to go through all the prompts for the other books. I did a good job, so it's fine. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I only read 3 out of 5 of the stories, and 2 of those stories got 2 stars from me, and then 1, Carmilla, received 3. I liked Carmilla. I liked the lesbian overtones because there were really no undertones about it. It was really interesting. I also liked how the horror element of the story is present throughout the entire story, unlike the 2 others that I read. And I thought that it was a very, very important vampire novella, and I'm really glad that I read it. And that's why I'm going to keep this on my shelves and maybe finish reading the other ones, the other 2 stories in the future, because Carmilla was one of the longer ones, and there is one other really long one in here that I didn't read. The other 2 stories I read were Green Tea and The Familiar, and I think part of the problem with these stories are that I just don't like Victorian or 19th century horror. I don't get scared, and when I'm reading something called horror or suspense, I need to actually feel those things. Not that I actually want to feel those things, because I don't like extra anxiety. So I think I just need to kind of stop trying with 19th century horror and suspense tales. I don't think I should ever read H.P. Lovecraft because I don't think I'm going to get anything out of it. Maybe I'll finish reading Edgar Allan Poe. I don't think I'm going to get anything out of him either. So at this point, it was a couple days before the end of the month. I had finished Carmilla and I just didn't care anymore. I liked Le Fanu's writing style a lot more than Poe's for a comparison, but for the most part it was just kind of like steady sort of thing, and then we learned what the whole thing was about, and then that's it. there wasn't a lot of suspense. I didn't find things that scary. So I decided just to read those 3 and just to be happy with it. I'm not counting this as a DNF, though I didn't finish it. And I don't know if I'm going to read those stories anytime soon, but they're here if I want to. So yeah, that's this. Read Carmilla, because that was really interesting. But the other 2, I don't know. So I think I was pretty successful with Victober. I am disappointed that I didn't read Daniel Deronda. However, if I had finished Daniel Deronda that month, I would have been going through the motions and not getting anything out of it, much like I did with the Oscar Wilde nonfiction and with some of Le Fanu's horror stories. And frankly, if you are not going to read something over and over again, there's no point in reading it at all. And if you're not even going to pay attention the first time you read it, there's really no point in you reading it. So Daniel Deronda I want to pay attention to, so I'm just going to have to wait till a different time. I think I have nearly worked the classics bug out, with so many of the classics I picked up this month being 3 stars or less. So I don't know if you're going to be seeing as much classics on my channel for the rest of this year. We'll have to see. I think it's going to be more of a mix. I don't know though. I would love to hear how your October reading went. Did you try something spooky? Are you a fan of 19th century horror? How did Victober go for you? If you did or participate in Victober. Do I speak English? Sometimes. Anyway, I am going to leave now. I hope that you had a wonderful Halloween if you celebrated Halloween, and I hope you had a wonderful last day of October if you didn't. Until next time, please read books and continue to be lovely.